Welcome back, gang. It's Deltia from Deltiasgaming.com here with an oakensoul PvE build that doesn't suck for the Arcanist. Let me explain what we created. The Arcanist with the oakensoul build is quite different than your prototypical heavy attack build, but we found a way to keep it very simple, extremely effective, high survivability, big damage, and a ton of healing, and I think you're going to be shocked at the results. I was able to trifecta Vatashram Hollows in 24 minutes. No, that's not world record blazing speed, but that's as fast as almost every single character but the Magic Sork, so it can compete with the very best of oakensoul 1-bar builds out there, and you're going to see a lot of it in this footage. So how the Arcanist works in terms of gameplay is all about building up cruxes. This is essentially why it doesn't work simply just doing fully charged heavy attacks like typical oakensoul builds. The reason why is the entire class premise is predicated on using a 4.5 second channel Fate Carver. You don't have a lot of in-class dots to support the heavy attack beaming, and so the DPS is extremely low, not effective, and not fun whatsoever. So what we're going to do is lean into exactly what the Arcanist does well. Big damage using Fate Carver. Playing at range, great resource sustain. The downside of the class currently in the gameplay is you are vulnerable while beaming using your Fate Carver ability. You are oakensoul dependent using this build, and you don't use the fully charged heavy attacks like normal. But just like an oakensoul build, it's going to be very simple, very survivable, and you're not going to sit there and do a gazillion global cooldowns running 1,000 dots to do heavy damage and high survivability. Let's explain the skills so this makes sense and show you how to use it. Putting together your skills and combinations can be one of the most fun and rewarding parts about MMOs. You know what I love most about MMORPGs? The number of builds you can create, theory crafting, customization, and well, fun. But what if there was a game with 7,000 unique champions and over billions of combinations and customization? And there is. That's today's sponsor, Raid Shadow Legends. And I'm going to tell you 3 things I love about the game. Number 1 thing I love about Raid Shadow Legends is its accessibility. Raid is a free-to-play game, so you can start right away just by simply downloading on Android, iOS, or PC using my link in the description below or scanning this QR code on screen. Number 2 thing I love about Raid is its graphics and visuals. Raid Shadow Legends delivers a visual feast like no other. Immerse yourself in jaw-dropping, high-definition graphics that bring the mystical realms to life. And number 3 thing is the PvP. PvP in Raid Shadow Legends is not just about brute force, it's a battle of wits and strategy. Raid Call of the Arbiter is in full swings now. To celebrate this epic limited series, Raid's adding some of the new characters from the series as champions you can play with in-game. The first one is Artok, a mighty orc warlord, and what's cool about Artok is he'll be available to everyone for free. All you have to do is log into Raid for 7 days between now and July 24th. If you've never played Raid Shadow Legends, now's a great time to jump in game and earn some exclusive rewards. Use my link in the description below or scan this QR code on screen to get insane bonuses right now. So jump in game, and I look forward to seeing you on the battlefield. Now, back to our video. Okay, we're jumping into the skills. I talked about the crux system, so it's clear if you're watching this video what that is. Certain abilities generate and consume cruxes. Cruxes are on your character, a little triangle that's green that floats around. When you have your max amount of crux, your ability bar will light up when the ability is maxed out and you can consume it. Typically, this means more damage, reduced cost, bigger shields, so on and so forth. So you need a crux builder, and you need a way to spend those cruxes on pretty much every single build. So how this build works generating cruxes is the flail ability. This is a stamina-based morph. It does physical damage, and it shoots out that big tentacle. It acts as a semi-execute, so it does more damage, 50% health or lower, but you're really not using it for that. You're using it for, number 1, it gets a 5% damage increase to enemies you drench in abyssal ink. And number 2, it generates a crux. Also hits pretty hard in AoE and has a 15-meter range, so you can play kind of a medium range build. In order to generate the crux though, you do need to hit a target, so make sure you're close enough to hit it or you won't generate it. So once you build up max stacks of cruxes, you're going to dump those cruxes for a beam. Fate Carver. There's essentially 2 really strong morphs that you need to make a decision on. A lot of this footage, I actually use exhausting Fate Carver, which is essentially more damage, but if you're watching this video when you start playing this character, I highly recommend taking Pragmatic Fate Carver. What Pragmatic does is it's going to consume crux, and it's going to give you a massive damage shield, and you'll be immune to interrupts when that shield holds. This will dramatically increase your survivability when you first start using this, because unlike every other build, you're going to have to get used to beaming a very long channel and not dying during it. As you get more familiar, you understand the mechanics, you can always go ahead and switch that more for big damage. But as the beginner, trust me. Another thing to note about Fate Carver, which I will show you here in the rotation, is you do have to aim it. So this big, huge laser beam shooting out your hands, you can't just sit there and AFK. It's not going to auto target for you. So it does have a pretty wide beam, pretty generous. It has a very long radius, so 22 meters, and it's pretty wide. So it's pretty easy. I'm done saying pretty, I promise you. It's very easy to hit the target with this, but you do need to aim it. So don't look up really high. Don't look at the ground. You're not going to hit anything or do any damage. Try to put it on the body like you're playing a shooter. So if you're following so far, we're going to use the flail ability to generate crux. Ideally, we want to get to 3 crux before we use Fate Carver. You do not have to use Fate Carver with any cruxes or 2 or 3. It just means that the more you have, the increased damage and the decrease the cost. And you're going to get a damage shield with this more. So if you just need to use the beam because you want to play further out range at 22 meters versus 15, or you're panicked and you just need a big, huge damage shield, cast it anyways. The third ability that kind of goes with this build is Recuperative Treatises. What this does is it's going to give you a little bit of magic damage when striking the enemy with your class abilities. So it's just going to buff up the other 2 abilities you're primarily using for damage. It's also going to give you back resources as well and generate crux if you have one. It has an additional function of giving you major brutality and major sorcery, but for this build we're going to be using oakensoul for that anyways, so it's not really that imperative. So maintain this as often as you can, especially before you do a Fate Carver, because it has a 30-second duration, so you're not going to be babysitting this, casting it all the time. But just realize when you go in that Fate Carver beam, it's going to last for quite a while, and you want to make sure that you have your treatises buffed up, ready to go. The other morph does a little bit more damage, but I found the resources thing to be fantastic, and your survivability dramatically increase when you take this morph. So that leaves 2 abilities on our bar, and we're going to use them for survivability. Now stick with me. They're going to seem kind of weird. I'm going to give you some flex options, but my survivability was absolutely insane with these abilities, and I'm thinking out of the box, and people are going to sleep on probably both of these abilities. But I'll give you some flex options if you want more damage. First up is kind of a weird ability. Stick with me, it's incredible. Spite Ward of the Lucid Mind. Think I got that right. What this is basically a damage shield from the tank skill line that scales off your max health. Since we're running Oakensoul with 5 light, 1 heavy, 1 medium, we're going to actually have a pretty decent health pool, which is going to give us a bigger damage shield. And the first time you take direct damage, the shield's going to retaliate, doing magic damage to the attacker, scaling off your armor. Again, scales off of tank stats, not that important. You can consume a crux to heal yourself, scaling off your max health, and refund 30% of Spite Ward's cost. So when you're in trouble, you can either have 2 abilities to basically consume cruxes. The Spite Ward giving you a big shield and retaliating, or you can even do a Fate Carver, which is going to give you a massive damage shield as well. So don't sleep on this ability. It's a great shield. It will heal you and it will keep you alive. Plus it's built into your class. The alternative here is to use Harness Magic from the light armor skill line. This is going to give you a big damage shield, but it's not going to heal you. And I'd like the Spite Ward over it. Another option is use Resolving Vigor. This is from Alliance 4. This is a bursty heal over time. The issue with that is it costs a lot of stamina, and our flail is going to cost stamina, not magic, and there's really no way to change that. So I found myself running out of stamina if I was using Resolving Vigor a lot. Speaking of scaling and how things cost, the Arcanist is a little bit different, and Pragmatic Fate Carver is determined on your highest max resource. So the highest attribute you have is going to determine the cost of your main spamble. And that's why we're going to go with high magic pool, because we want it to consume magic, not stamina. So we're going to spend predominantly our stamina pool on Flail almost entirely, and Spite Ward will cost magic along with our main spamble and some other flexibilities. It's tricky getting used to this ability, but you just spam the shield, consume cruxes, you're going to heal and be very, very survivable. Speaking of survivability, a very big sleeper skill is actually Structured Entropy, coming from the Mage's Guild. So in the footage, I use different skills because I play Vatishram Hollows in my sleep, so I wouldn't recommend this for every single player. So start with this at first to determine if you have the survivability needed to absolutely blow through content. What it's going to do is actually a really strong single target damage over time. The only thing is it's going to heal you every 2 seconds. This thing can heal for 3,000 on a crit. So you're going to have a lot of healing just passively coming in. Between this healing coming in, Pragmatic Fate Carver giving you a massive shield, and then the heal from Flail, which I don't even know if I mentioned, it does give you a decent heal, and you have a shield on demand. You should be extremely tanky. So if you're over tanky and you don't have enough damage, this is what I would change out as Structured Entropy. The Arcanist specifically doesn't have a whole lot of dots that are actually that good, so I found it more helpful to flex in another ability that gives major breach. Typically I go with the Destruction Staff skill, Elemental Susceptibility. This is going to lower resistances significantly, which is really good in solo play, but if you have a tank that's going to strip resources, it's not that good. Elemental Susceptibility also gives 3 huge status effects, which will radically increase your damage when playing solo. Now, their alternative to this is Razor Caltrops from the Alliance War. This is also a strong choice, especially when playing something like VMA, because the mobs come in waves, and they're basically in this little animation for 5 or 6 seconds, so you can kind of pre-cast it with Elemental Susceptibility requires a target. But either way, when I'm playing solo, I go Structured Entropy for survivability, Susceptibility for single target boss fight, or Razor Caltrops for VMA. If you did want to run another damage over time from in class, I would go with Fulminating Rune. This does a decent amount of damage over time, similar to the tooltip on Structured Entropy. It's not going to kill you, but it is going to do a detonation. It also has a synergy that is very, very useful in group play, so that's what I would swap to. And last up, we're going to talk about the ultimate. So ZeniMax Online Studios made a big change to the ultimate, and the Tide King's Gaze is an absolute fantastic one. What this is going to do is lock on to a target, and it's going to increase the duration. It's going to follow that initial target and search for new targets if it's killed. The duration is 8 seconds. It costs 175 ultimate and a 5-meter AoE, which isn't that big, but the channel so quickly, so violently, and such a low ultimate cost is absolutely fantastic for huge damage. A lot of players typically go with Shooting Star from the Mages Guild, which it is actually annoying to max out your Mages Guild. This thing actually pound for pound does almost the same amount of damage. Now, Mages Guild does give you back ultimate when you hit a bunch of targets, so it can be very useful in trash pulls, but for single target, it's built in your class kit so you don't have to mess with Mages Guild. It hits very, very hard, and the channel is very, very fast. That's exceptional for solo play, where you really need just to beam down a target, get that ultimate back quick, and then use it. But if you like Shooting Star, you can flex that in. Another good option is from the Destruction Staff skill line, since we are using a Lightning Staff on the front. The reason why we use a Lightning Staff on the front, in case I haven't mentioned that, is the Ancient Knowledge passive. This is going to give an increase to area damage, AoE damage, which is pretty much all of our abilities. So just using a Lightning Staff, similar to an oakensoul heavy attack build, will allow us to rip off fully charged heavy attacks and get a bunch of resources back, but we're really not going for the off-balance elemental wall sitting and using sergeants. It's just not as effective as using the Fate Carver's loadout, but the Lightning Staff and using it for the AoE passive is. And that's your skills. I'm going to jump in game and kind of show you what this looks like and kind of how the rotation and the flow looks so you can kind of master this and make it your own. Now we're in game, show you the rotation. Typically you want to start longest to shortest when it comes to your buffs and debuffs. The reason why is when you use 1 second, aka a global cooldown, which is 1 second in the game, you want the longer duration so that way you don't have to go reapply it very often. So for us, just pre-buffing, we're just going to use Recuperative Treatises. Everything else that's going to cause damage, we're not going to cast until we're ready to start combat. So typically what I do is I start out Recuperative Treatises, and I'll get my healing rolling. And you can see 3,000 was a crit, 3,000 was a crit. So it's a lot of healing, and the dot's pretty significant. Now you need to close into 15-meter range to get the flail debuff going. So 1 flail, you can see that's about 15 meters. You can see the top of my bar, it has that debuff counting down. That's a 5% damage increase that you're going to want to try to maintain. You're also going to use the skill again, which costs stamina, so be cognizant of that, to get up another crux. Now you can see my character has the 3 cruxes zooming around it. And also you can see on my skill bar, the number 2 key light up, indicating that it's ready for a big, nasty 3-stack beam. So what I'm going to do before I beam, though, in case this is actually going on, I'm going to hit Recuperative Treatises. I'm also going to recast my damage over time, so that's ticking while I'm doing the beam. Once I get those both recast and ready to go, I hit a Fate Carver. So now you'll notice I got a big, huge damage shield while Fate Carver's up, which allows me to be very survivable during that 4.5 second channel. So you can use Fake Harbor without the Crux if you want to, and it doesn't do as much damage. And another thing to note about this is aiming. So right here, aim, I point, not hitting it, not hitting it, not hitting it, right? So you have to be right on the target pretty good. This is gonna take a little bit of practice to get used to this. Not pointing down, not pointing up, but right on target. Another thing about using this ability is you're gonna have to cancel the animation sometimes and not just lock into the huge long animation. Boss is gonna hit you, heavy attack's gonna come. So if you wanna do that, all you do is like block, that, it'll stop the animation. You can also bash, that'll stop the animation, and then you can dodge. So typically what I do, I just bash. So for instance, if I'm like up here and a boss is about to clip me or hit me, I just block real quick or bash, and then I'm good to go, or dodge, roll out. That will stop the animation. So just be aware. Now, when you get in trouble, you're gonna have your shield to cast. Typically, you don't wanna use your cruxes for it, but it's just an oh crap panic button that comes in your class, and we have 25k HP. Also, if you get in trouble, once you have your shield up, use flail for some healing. If I hit the flail, that's 3,800 non-crit. See if I can get a crit. 3,900 non-crit, 8,000 crit healing on that. Remember, it's AoE, so you can hit multiple targets. So if you do the math on this, you got healing coming in almost 3,000 from here. You got Abyssal Ink that you can hit, and then boom, you got a big shield. Now you pair that with another shield from Fake Harbor, and look at your health bar. It's almost entirely a shield. So it's actually quite survivable, not using the oakensoul heavy attack loadout, but using a lot of shields and simple heals over time, keeping your distance survivability. Typically, everything's up is when I drop my ultimate. So I'm gonna rebuff, I'm gonna hit this guy, I'm gonna get my flail up, 1, 2, and then my 3 stacks are up. I'm gonna hit my ultimate Tide King, light attack, and then just sit there and laser beam it. So you have the dot ticking, if you're enchant proc with the burning status effect, you have the debuff for 5% damage, you have the Tide King rolling, and you have Fake Harbor. But it's actually really simple. You're just maintaining 1 dot, 1 buff, and then using that flail to basically get up your stacks, and then just doing Fake Harbor. And if you don't want to mess with flail, you can just sit there and do Fake Harbor over and over and over and be very survivable, great damage at range, and it's a good build. Now you understand the skills, how to use it. Let's talk about gear, because everyone wants to know about the gear. So this is going to be with the oakensoul Mythic. We're going to use a lightning staff. Again, it buffs our AoE damage via the destruction staff passive, so that's why I'm going to go with the lightning staff, not necessarily for the fully charged heavy attacks. Oakensoul is a mythic requiring the antiquity system, but what it does is gives you an enormous amount of buffs, freeing up a lot of action so you don't have to cast things all the time. Very, very simple and easy set and forget. If you do not have the Oakensoul Mythic that came out with the High Isles chapter, it's going to be very hard to pull off this build simply because Oakensoul just gives you an enormous amount of buffs for damage, survivability, armor, crits, brutality, you name it. But I would go with Pale Order for pure raw healing, or Death Dealer's Fate, or big, huge, massive stats. So Oakensoul is the base. It's going to lock us into 1 bar, part of the Antiquities High Isle. The 5-piece setup we're going to go with is going to be very popular for people to use is Deadly Strikes. This is medium armor. It comes in Cyrodiil, the PvP area, Bruma Elite Vendor. So it's base game. You also can buy this from the traders. Getting the lightning staff should be pretty easy. The reason we're going to use this, it provides the most damage for the Arcanist, both because our damage abilities are channels. Remember, the flail ability is technically a channel, 0.3 seconds, and the beam, well, it's obviously 4.5 second channel. So getting 15% damage along with our dot that we're running is just too good to pass up, and the fact that it's base game is fantastic. So the other 5-piece that we're gonna go with is Back Alley Gourmand. This is a Firesong DLC Overland Zone set, meaning you can buy it off the traders, or you can go to that DLC to get it. I'm going to give you some flexible options if you don't have it. The reason I found this one so useful is light armor gives you a lot of critical chance, and it gives you a lot of penetration built in because of the light armor passive. But what it doesn't give you is critical damage. So you really want to find a set that gives you a lot of critical damage, because that's what the light armor is specifically missing. Where medium armor users have a lot of crit damage, they want a lot of penetration. You're trying to basically not go over 125% crit damage. That's the cap in Elder Scrolls Online. Going beyond that is just a dead stat. You also don't want to go above 18,200 penetration, because And vet content, anything above that is essentially a dead stat. You can find this in your advanced character screen, both of these stats, your crit chance, a bunch of other little fun facts for your character. So Gourmand is a great set that's going to raise that thing that we don't have up so we can do big crits. So those are the 5 pieces that I'd recommend. Let me give you some flexible options in case you don't have them. The number one, if you don't want to use Gourmand, because you do need to have food with it, not a drink, and that's important to note or you're not going to get that buff, is Order's Wrath. This is a craftable set and what I consider probably overall the best set in the game. It comes from the High Isles chapter and it's 3 traits, very easy to get. You also can get around not having the High Isles, just going to someone's house if they have the specific crafting stations, or you can just buy it from the traders. It's going to be a little bit less critical damage than Gourmand, but you don't have to fuss with food, and it's craftable, not overland, so you can just make it yourself. Another option would be War Maiden. The reason why War Maiden's okay is because your main Fate Carver is technically magic damage, and War Maiden is base game Vardenfell, which you can access now, and it's 600 weapon or spell damage to your magic abilities, so that's actually a decent set. Another base game set is Soul Shine. This, activating the ability with a cast or a channel, will give you 369 weapon and spell damage. This comes from Reaper's March, so it's very easy to get. The downside of this is it comes in heavy armor, so you're going to need to replace your deadly strikes if you don't have it, and get that for a bit of damage. A sweatier set is Perfected False Gods. This comes from Veteran Sunspire, or you can do the normal mode for a little bit lesser of a version. This is just going to carry your magic, resource sustain. It's going to give you back magic when mobs die in major expedition. This is what people typically use to try to trifecta those solo arenas. An alternative to that set for great resource sustain and survivability is the base game set Robes of the Withered Hand. This comes from Alakir Desert, and when anything dies within 28 meters, you're going to get back health and magic, and it can occur every 3 seconds. Typically in solo gameplay, you're always killing something, so it's a great set starting out, especially that it's base game. Another fantastic base game set that's going to give you a lot of critical chance is Mother's Sorrow, coming in light armor from Deshawn. And those are your options if you don't necessarily have the typical sets that I recommend. And don't feel like you can't play this build without them. There's tons of options in the Elder Scrolls Online. Now, a lot of people use medium armor in the current meta, but on an oakensoul build, using light armor is still fantastic if you're doing solo content. The only thing you run into with light armor is if you do more serious stuff, you're going to go over that penetration cap of 18,200. That's for trials, veteran hard modes, and so on. I have another version of this build not using oakensoul that uses medium armor that's absolutely fantastic, but don't stress it. Almost all the content in the game outside of super serious stuff you can do. If you spill over a little bit, it's not a big deal, but you need to be cognizant of those numbers and know exactly that's the stats you're aiming for. Now, the miscellaneouses with this build, I would recommend the High Elf as probably the best specific race for this. Now, I played it as a Khajiit, and I'll get to the reason why. But as a beginner, if you're using this, you actually get spell recharge. So when you're channeling, it reduces your damage taken. That's quite significant. It's not a named buff, so it can stack with other ones. You got great resource sustain, max magic, and weapon and spell damage with the High Elf. Another option that I would go with is the Khajiit. It's very well rounded, and for solo play specifically, it has increased crit damage and crit healing up to 12% when you max it out. Exactly what light armor is missing. So you're going to use big damage, huge crits with the Khajiit, and you can play magic, you can play stamina, and bounce back and forth. It's great. For attributes, remember that your skills are going to scale off your max stats. You're going to want to stack one, and magic makes the most sense. And this plays traditionally like a magic build, even though we're not doing fully charged heavy attacks. For the Mundus Stone, it's a pretty obvious one. That's the Thief. The Lover is typically taken for reduced armor in solo play, but with this build, you should be pretty close to the penetration cap, even playing solo, so stick with the Thief. Jumping in game here, going over the champion points. So what to note is this is a dynamic CP that shows all the names of it. I like Fighting Finesse because critical damage is important for light armor users. Biting Aura, Thaumaturge, since we're doing AoE and we're doing damage over time with channels. Now you have a third option. If you have really good damage or really good survivability, Wrathful Strikes is a good play here. But Reaving Blows, that you're not using Pale Order, will give you a lot of healing passively. This will give you 8% when you're doing direct damage. So believe it or not, that kind of adds up with Structured Entropy and other ones. But if your survivability is good, drop that, go with Wrathful Strikes. If you're watching this, pro tip for beginners, take the Preparation passive. 10% damage reduction. insane. And that applies in all PvE instances, regardless if you take the slottables and these fancy ones. Moving over to the red trait. Balanced vitality, max health, fortified for armor, rejuvenation for resource sustain, and then I have a flex skill. I'm gonna take Bastion instead of Shield Master, and what Bastion's gonna do is increase the effectiveness and damage done of shields. So you're gonna get a much bigger shield with your choose shield abilities. Your main Spamble, your main nuke, Fate Carver will give you a shield, and also Spite Ward will give you a shield. So this will actually increase it. Shield Master is just for cheaper cost reduction, but we should be pretty good on resource sustain. The one resource that I run out of on this build is actually not magic, but stamina due to the flail ability. So believe it or not, if my shield, I don't necessarily need bigger shields, I'll actually take Bloody Renewal. Not Siphoning Spell, because typically I'm running out of stamina, not magic, since it's really good resource sustain. But either way, I'd go with these three, and then a flex option here, depending on what your needs are. Coming over here, these are just basically random ones that really don't affect performance that much. Rationer and Liquid Efficiency can save you some gold. Steed's Blessing can make you a little bit faster, and then Gifted Rider up here will make you a little bit faster on mount speed. Just some basic stuff if you want, but those are usually what I go with. I just got these random ones on the PTS. So for consumables, I go with the Bewitched Sugar Skull because you need food to activate Gourmand, so keep that in mind. This is going to give you a big, huge max stat pool, and max health is quite important with this build, so you want to use it, but it doesn't have any resource sustain with it, so be aware that might be an issue for you. A good option for you if you need resource sustain, but you still want a little bit of max health and you're willing to sacrifice the other max stats, is Jewels of Mistral. This is dirt cheap. It can be used at level 1. It's going to give you max health in both resource sustain pools, so stamina and magicka. That's fantastic, dirt cheap, and will carry your resource sustain if you don't have any built in. Speaking of resource sustain, let's talk about potions. So with oakensoul builds, you have built in a lot of your buffs anyways, so you don't need weapon and spell damage and critical buffs and all that. You already have that built in. So what I recommend is just using good old try potions. The Crown Store ones, they give them to you for free, or you can just make them on your own. There's other fancier ones that you can run with, like Major Expedition if you want to be fast and so on. I got these heroes and potions, but you have minor heroes and built into oakensoul, so that's not necessarily the play. Stick with tripods and just use them infrequently and use them as a burst heal, because you can see it's almost 10,000 health. So what I do is I wait till my stamina's a bit low, or I wait till I really need a burst heal and I pop one of those tripods. Thanks again for Raid Shadow Legends sponsoring this stream, and we encourage you to download right now. Jump in game using my code link in the description below, or this QR code, and get a bunch of new bonuses for new players when you join. Well, gang, that's the video. oakensoul, we finally got one. It doesn't use the void charge heavy attacks like everything else, but it's just as simple, just as tanky, and just as damage producing, and can absolutely blaze through content. So if you get something out of this, give me a thumbs up. Check the link in the description below for the build on my website in case anything changes. And come watch me on twitch.tv/Deltiasgaming. My mom claims I'm the best streamer alive. Appreciate you.